She stood in the middle of the throne room, head bowed, while the entire court laughed at her. Nobody in the kingdom believed that the quiet, useless princess sitting in the corner of every royal banquet would one day become the very reason that kingdom survived. They called her weak. They called her a disappointment. Some even whispered that she wasn't fit to wear the crown at all. But what none of them knew, not her father, not her sisters, not a single noble in that golden hall, was that the girl they mocked every single day was quietly becoming something none of them could ever stop. This is the story of Princess Elara. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the people who laughed at her the loudest were the same people who, one day, had no choice but to kneel. Stay with me because what happens in the middle of this story is something you will not see coming. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional, powerful stories like this one, stories about underestimated people who rise against all odds, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon too so you never miss the next story. Alright, let's get back to Elara because things are about to get very interesting. Before we dive deeper, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? If you're in the USA, drop a comment and let me know which state you're watching from right now. I read every single comment, so don't be shy. Let's see how many states we can collect by the end of this video. Now let's go back to the kingdom where our story begins. The kingdom of Velmoria was known across the continent for its wealth, its beauty, and its powerful royal family. Golden fields stretched for miles, the castle towers touched the clouds, and every princess born into the royal bloodline was expected to be graceful, sharp-tongued in politics, and dazzling in every ballroom she entered. King Alaric ruled Velmoria with pride, and Queen Muriel was known throughout the land for her elegance and wit. Together they had 3 daughters. The eldest, Princess Sariel, was admired for her beauty and her ability to charm entire rooms with a single smile. The second daughter, Princess Ophelia, was known for her sharp intelligence and her talent for strategy. Many already whispered that she would make a brilliant queen one day. And then there was Elara, the youngest. From the moment she was born, something about Elara felt different to the people around her. She wasn't loud. She didn't laugh easily at court jokes. She rarely spoke unless she had something meaningful to say. And in a family and a kingdom that valued charm and performance above everything else, her quiet nature was seen as a flaw rather than a strength. As a child, Elara struggled with her health. She was often sick, thinner than the other children her age, and unable to keep up during royal training sessions. Horseback riding, sword practice, even simple etiquette lessons left her exhausted. While her sisters trained for hours and returned glowing with praise from their tutors, Elara often returned to her chambers alone, quietly nursing her tired body and her bruised confidence. The court began to talk. Nobles whispered that the youngest princess was fragile, unfit, and worst of all, unworthy of the Velmorian bloodline. Some even dared to say, quietly at first and then more openly as the years passed, that perhaps the kingdom would have been better off without a third daughter at all. Elara heard these words more times than anyone should ever have to. And instead of breaking her, something inside her began to change. Instead of speaking to defend herself, she began to watch. She began to listen. While the other princesses learned to dazzle a room, Elara learned to understand people. Their fears, their desires, the reasons behind their cruelty. She spent long hours in the castle library, reading books on history, strategy, medicine, and the ancient laws of the kingdom that most nobles never bothered to open. Her personal maid, an older woman named Beth, was the only person in the entire castle who seemed to see something different in her. Late at night, when Elara couldn't sleep, Beth would sit with her by candlelight and listen to her read aloud from dusty old volumes about herbal remedies, forgotten battles, and the geography of distant lands. "You have a mind like a locked treasure chest, child," Beth once told her. "One day, someone is going to need exactly what's inside it." Elara laughed softly at the time, not quite believing it. But she never forgot those words. There was also her grandmother, the old Dowager Queen Isolde, who lived in a quiet wing of the castle and rarely appeared at court anymore. Unlike the rest of the family, Isolde had once been a healer herself before marrying into royalty, and she recognized something familiar in her youngest granddaughter, a stillness that wasn't weakness but focus. On rare afternoons, Isolde would invite Elara to her chambers for tea and share stories of her own youth, when she too had been dismissed by the court as too plain and too serious to matter. "They will underestimate you for exactly as long as it's convenient for them," Isolde told her once, stirring her tea slowly. "The moment you become useful, they will pretend they always believed in you. Don't let that confuse you about who truly saw you first." Those words settled deep into Elara's heart, becoming something she carried with her long after her grandmother passed away when Elara was just 14. It was, in many ways, the last piece of wisdom Isolde ever gave her, and one that would prove truer than either of them could have imagined. Nobody else noticed her efforts. To the court, she was still just the quiet, weak princess hiding in the shadows of her more impressive sisters. But shadows, as Elara would soon prove, can hide far more than anyone expects. As Elara grew older, the mockery didn't fade. It grew sharper and far more public. At the kingdom's annual summer ball, an event where every noble family gathered to see the three princesses in their finest gowns, Elara's sisters glided across the dance floor with practiced grace, drawing gasps of admiration from the crowd. When it was Elara's turn to be introduced, a hush fell, not out of respect, but out of quiet, cruel curiosity. She walked forward in a simple gown, far less elaborate than what her sisters wore, because she had insisted on modesty over spectacle. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. One noblewoman, Lady Cassandra, leaned toward her friends and said just loud enough for Elara to hear, "Is this truly the best Velmoria has to offer? No wonder they keep her hidden most days." Elara said nothing. She simply lowered her eyes, curtsied, and stepped back into the shadows of the ballroom. Her chest tight with humiliation she refused to let show on her face. It wasn't just the nobles. Even within the palace walls, Elara faced constant comparison. Her father, though not unkind, often sighed when her name came up in conversation, comparing her quietness to her sister's vibrant personalities. "Why can't you be more like Sariel?" he once asked her directly, not realizing how deeply those words cut. Her sisters, too, though not always intentionally cruel, often left her out of important conversations, assuming she had nothing valuable to contribute. During council meetings that the princesses were sometimes allowed to observe, Ophelia would present brilliant strategies while advisors nodded in approval. And when Elara once tried to offer a quiet suggestion about the kingdom's failing trade routes, one of the senior advisors chuckled and said, "Let the grown-ups handle matters of state, little one." The words stung more than she ever admitted. There was one particular evening, after a especially painful dinner where her father openly praised Ophelia's political insight in front of visiting dignitaries while barely acknowledging Elara's presence at the table, that she retreated to the castle gardens and finally allowed herself to cry. She sat beneath an old oak tree for hours, wondering if the whispers were true, if she truly was as useless as everyone believed. But something inside her refused to fully break. Instead of retreating completely, she began preparing, quietly, secretly. She studied maps of neighboring kingdoms, memorizing mountain passes, rivers, and trade routes late into the night. She learned about herbal medicine from the castle healers, often sneaking into the infirmary at night to learn how to treat wounds and illnesses, watching the elderly healer, Master Doran, work on patients when he thought no one was watching. She practiced archery alone in secluded parts of the castle gardens, teaching herself with old books and sheer determination, since no tutor believed she was strong enough to be trained properly. Master Doran eventually noticed her lingering by the infirmary door one too many times, and instead of turning her away, he allowed her to stay. "Most people who walk through that door either want power or want to be seen," he told her once. "You're the first one who just wants to understand." Under his quiet guidance, she learned things that no royal tutor had ever bothered to teach a princess. How fever spread, how wounds became infected, how contaminated water could destroy an entire village faster than any army. Nobody else saw this side of her. To the kingdom, she remained the weak princess. But in the silence of her solitude, Elara was slowly, steadily becoming someone entirely different from the girl they mocked. There was one moment, in particular, that Elara would remember for the rest of her life. It happened during a hunting trip organized by her father for visiting nobles from a neighboring province. Elara had been invited only because etiquette demanded it, not because anyone expected her to participate. While the group rode ahead, laughing and boasting about their skills, one of the younger stable boys was thrown from his horse and badly injured his leg on a jagged rock near the riverbank. The nobles panicked, unsure of what to do, and someone suggested simply carrying him back to the castle as quickly as possible. But Elara, who had quietly slipped off her own horse, knelt beside the boy and calmly began examining the wound. She tore a strip of cloth from her riding cloak, cleaned the injury with water from her flask, and set the bone with a steadiness that startled everyone watching. "How do you know how to do that?" one of the visiting lords asked, half in disbelief. "Master Doran taught me," she said simply, not looking up from her work. The boy recovered fully within weeks, but the story of the princess who fixed the stable boy's leg spread only briefly through the servants' quarters before fading into rumor and disbelief among the nobility. Most of the court dismissed it as exaggeration, unwilling to believe that the same girl they mocked at every ball could possess any real skill at all. Elara didn't correct them. She simply returned to her books, her quiet research, and her long nights in the infirmary, patiently waiting for a moment she didn't yet know was coming. Then came the night that changed everything. It began with a messenger arriving at the castle gates, breathless and pale, delivering news that sent the entire kingdom into chaos. The neighboring kingdom of Draymore, long a bitter rival of Valmoria, had launched a surprise attack on one of the border villages. Worse still, a strange illness had begun spreading rapidly among the wounded soldiers being brought back, a sickness the royal physicians could not identify, let alone treat. King Alaric convened an emergency council, and the great hall filled with anxious nobles, generals, and physicians all speaking over one another. Princess Sariel, though beloved by the people, had no experience in military or medical matters. Princess Ophelia, brilliant in political strategy, understood troop movements and alliances but knew nothing of medicine. The physicians were overwhelmed, arguing amongst themselves about the cause of the fever, and the illness was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. In the middle of the chaos, as advisors argued and the king paced anxiously by the window, a quiet voice spoke up from the back of the room. "I think I know what this illness is." Every head turned. It was Elara. For a moment, there was silence, the same dismissive silence that had followed her for years. Someone near the front almost laughed, a soft scoffing sound quickly hidden behind a hand. But something in her voice this time was different. Steady, certain, and shaken. "I've read about a similar outbreak in the historical records from 50 years ago," she continued, stepping forward until she stood at the center of the room, in full view of everyone who had ever doubted her. "It matches the symptoms described in the Eastern Healer archives, a fever that spreads through contaminated water, not through the air as everyone assumes. If we don't act immediately, it won't just affect the soldiers, it will spread through the entire village and eventually the capital itself." The room fell into stunned silence. King Alaric, visibly shaken, asked the question everyone was thinking. "How do you know this?" Elara didn't flinch. "Because while everyone believed I was doing nothing all these years, I was learning. I studied every book in this castle that no one else bothered to open. I spent years in the infirmary while you all thought I was simply too weak to be anywhere else." For the first time in her life, Elara wasn't looking down. She was looking directly into the eyes of the people who had mocked her for years, and for the first time, none of them were laughing. The king, desperate and out of options, made a decision that shocked the entire court. He authorized Elara to lead the medical response herself, alongside the royal physicians and Master Doran. What followed were the most intense days Valmoria had seen in years. Elara worked almost without rest, directing the physicians to boil and purify the water supplies in the affected village, isolating contaminated wells, and treating the fevered soldiers with remedies she had learned from the old healer texts. Remedies most modern physicians had long dismissed as outdated superstition. Lady Cassandra, the very noblewoman who had mocked her gown at the summer ball, arrived at the makeshift medical camp with her own brother among the wounded soldiers. She watched, humiliated and silent, as Elara carefully treated her brother's fever through the night, refusing to leave his side even when exhaustion clearly weighed on her own thin frame. At one point, Lady Cassandra offered to help hold a basin of water, her hands trembling, not from fear of the illness, but from the shame of everything she had once said. Meanwhile, as the illness began to slow its spread thanks to Elara's methods, word arrived that Draemore's forces were regrouping for a second attack, believing Velmoria to be weakened and vulnerable after the outbreak. Princess Ophelia, working alongside the generals late into the night, needed accurate information about the enemy's likely movements. And it was Elara, drawing from maps she had secretly studied for years in the quiet of her chambers, who identified a hidden mountain pass that Draemore's forces were likely to use for a surprise assault on the capital. Her information allowed Velmoria's forces to intercept the attack before it ever reached the capital, turning what could have been a devastating defeat into a decisive, celebrated victory. Soldiers who returned from that battle spoke of the princess who saw the enemy's path before they even took it. General Harwick, a battle-hardened commander who had served the crown for over 30 years and had never once spoken directly to Elara before that week, approached her privately after the victory. He removed his helmet, bowed his head slightly and said, "In 30 years of service, I have never seen intelligence gathered as precisely as yours, Princess. My scouts would have taken a week to confirm what you told us in an hour." Elara simply nodded, still unused to being taken seriously, still half expecting someone to laugh at any moment. No one did. The days that followed the battle were a strange blur for her. She moved between the medical camp, where the last of the fever patients were recovering, and the War Council, where generals now asked for her opinion before making decisions. It was a world she had only ever read about in books, and suddenly she was standing inside it, not as an observer, but as someone whose voice carried weight. When the dust settled and the illness had been fully contained, the same nobles who had once whispered cruel words behind Elara's back now stood in stunned, humbled silence. Lady Cassandra, in front of the entire court, publicly thanked Elara for saving her brother's life, her voice trembling with an emotion far different from the mockery of before. "I judged you by the way you entered a room," she admitted quietly, "when I should have judged you by what you carried inside it." Even King Alaric, who had so often compared her unfavorably to her sisters, knelt before her in the great hall, not as a father, but as a king honoring the person who had saved his kingdom. In the weeks that followed, Velmoria was a different kingdom, and so was Elara's place within it. She was given a new title, Royal Advisor of Medicine and Strategy, a role created specifically because of what she had proven during the crisis. Nobles who once mocked her openly sought her counsel on matters ranging from public health to border security. Children in the village began telling stories about the quiet princess who saved the kingdom, drawing pictures of her tending to the sick, and travelers from neighboring lands spoke of her wisdom with genuine respect. Her sisters, too, saw her differently now. Ophelia often sought her opinion during council meetings, no longer dismissing her insights as irrelevant, and the two grew closer than they had ever been as children. Sariel, moved by her sister's quiet strength, apologized privately for the years of unintentional neglect, admitting she had never truly understood the depth of what Elara carried inside her all along. Master Doran, watching from the back of a council meeting one afternoon as Elara calmly advised the king on a new water sanitation policy for the kingdom's villages, simply smiled to himself and said nothing. He didn't need to. Beth, her old maid, cried happy tears the first time she saw Elara addressed as Lady Elara, advisor to the crown, by a visiting dignitary. Elara herself did not change who she was. She remained quiet, thoughtful and humble, but now the entire kingdom understood that her silence had never been weakness. It had been the sound of someone quietly preparing for a moment the world hadn't yet given her. One quiet evening, months after the crisis had passed, Elara found herself back in the same castle garden where she had once cried beneath the old oak tree. This time, she sat there not out of sorrow, but out of reflection, watching the sunset paint the Velmorian sky in shades of gold and violet. She thought of her grandmother's words, of Master Doran's patience, of Beth's quiet faith in her, all the people who had seen something in her long before the rest of the kingdom did. She realized, sitting there, that she had never actually needed the court's approval to become who she was meant to be. She had simply needed time, and the courage to keep learning even when no one was watching or believing in her. The recognition that came afterward was welcome, But it wasn't what had shaped her. What shaped her were the years nobody saw. The quiet ones, the lonely ones, the ones spent reading by candlelight while the rest of the castle slept. And perhaps that's the real lesson in Elara's story. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest one. Sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is simply waiting for the right moment to show the world exactly who they've always been. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. There are so many more incredible stories like Elara's coming very soon. And don't forget, drop a comment below and let me know which USA state you're watching from today. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.